How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we are going to talk about complacency today. More specific, 13 faces of complacency in corrections. Complacency is our worst enemy. It's the subtle effect it has on the mindset for us to believe that everything is okay. We slowly start to accept that as the norm. We cut corners, that becomes the norm. And then eventually we train people on that acceptance, on that less effective norm. And guys, if Russ was on the show today, I know it's a little early for Russ to be on. He's on California time. He got this great quote. Complacency is situational awareness perceived but not achieved. And that's scary because that's the perception that you're doing it correctly. So you've accepted it, you bought in, but technically you're not. You're far away from what it takes to be effective. And that is a scary concept because when you don't know, you don't know. You could be training people on what you don't know. Hey guys, before we get into the 13 faces, I just want to mention I got 3 books on the market: Inmate Manipulation Decoded. Books available all across the country, used for training all across the country, even outside this country. It's available on Amazon. Get your hands on it. And we also have How to Succeed in Corrections and Tips for New Correctional Officers and Their Supervisors, published by Blue 360 Media. That book's got tons of advice, so get your hands on those books as well. You got to order those directly to the publisher. And then I also have 3 other books coming out, one on dealing with unruly inmates, another just for correctional leadership advice, and then I got one on report writing coming out, which is very exhaustive, but I'm looking for that book to come out as soon as possible. I believe that's going to be the first of the new 3 that are coming out, so I can't wait for you guys to get your hands on that and give me some of the feedback. But that book is very exhaustive. I know that book is going to save careers. It covers so many different angles and just basically puts everything together so people could see, you know, how not only how a report needs to be structured, but the end game. What's the packet look like, you know, from the beginning of the incident to the complete conclusion. All right, so let's go over some of these faces of complacency in corrections. And again, just keep Russ's quote in the back of your mind. Complacency is situational awareness perceived, but not achieved. Okay, so the first one is procedural. And basically, it's cutting corners or skipping established procedures. So let's give you some examples. Skipping routine cell checks because nothing has ever been found before. Failing to search inmates thoroughly during intake. Not following protocols for handling contraband. Overlooking proper documentation for inmate transfers. Not conducting regular head counts as scheduled. Or ignoring the need for backup during potentially dangerous situations. And what's the impact? Well, standards get lowered, creating a culture of lax enforcement. New staff may be trained on these lower standards, believing they are correct, perpetrating the cycle of poor practice, and this can lead to increased security breaches and higher risk of incidents. And the solution here is implement regular audits and peer reviews to ensure procedures are followed, reinforce training on the importance of adhering to protocols, and conduct surprise inspections to maintain standards. So you can obviously see within the solutions, you probably got the supervisor that's definitely needed to maintain those audits, make sure staff is doing what they're supposed to be doing, check those logbooks, you know, basically make sure they're doing their rounds, etc. And then you also have maybe help from administration to get the bigger things together, like more training, developing more policies that can aid, and also doing those surprise inspections. That's not just from the supervisors, but that's really all levels. Usually your presence helps people, or should help people, kind of be on their A game. Sadly, when these complacent practices become the norm, people may not realize they're doing anything wrong. So when you go on a scene, especially if you're a high-level supervisor and you still see those complacent habits, they're habits that have not just settled in but have been accepted. Because technically, when you're on that scene, people should be cleaning themselves up, being the best they need to be. So whatever's left over could be stuff that they've accepted. So having said that, you really got to focus on those things that they're missing out, because most of those things could be the basics. And sadly, we don't realize the basics are not being done until they're not being done. So you got to get those audits in and make sure those basics are being done, because everything evolves from those basics. We also have environmental. So environmental complacency is becoming too comfortable with surroundings and missing the subtle changes. You can get two extremes on that. You can get the facilities where nothing happens and they kind of live on the mantra that stuff like that doesn't happen here. And then you get the facilities that are very active and just kind of in the routine of activity, they become exhausted. And it's like, oh, just another day. Just another day. So those could be issues where we get used to how the environment is and we just kind of go with that flow. A lot of codes, we're exhausted, so we just kind of may lack effort because at the end, maybe nothing really major happens after these codes. So it's just another day. I'm sure we'll get through it. And then you get the ones where nothing happens at the facility. And it's like, okay, I get what's happening all across the country, but that's never going to happen here. That absolute, that never is going to happen here is where we start to settle into and we start believing it. So when we start speaking in absolutes, we have to be very careful because we're not allowing for the uniqueness to step in. So watch for those absolute terms. But just some examples here. Becoming too comfortable with surroundings, so missing subtle changes. Ignoring new graffiti or gang signs in common areas. That's one. Not noticing changes in inmates' behavior or group dynamics. Overlooking maintenance issues that could become security risk. Failing to recognize new hiding spots for contraband. And ignoring signs of potential escape attempts like tampered windows or fences. And not updating security measures to adapt to environmental changes. So what's the impact here? So important changes in the environment, such as new gang signs or escape attempts, go unnoticed. This can lead to unaddressed security threats and potentially dangerous situations. The facility's ability to respond to evolving threats is compromised. And the solution is, again, conduct regular environmental assessments and encourage staff to report changes. Implement routine walkthroughs by supervisors to identify and address potential issues. All right, so now we have the next one. We got interpersonal complacency. So that's over trusting inmates due to familiarity. And this usually comes because of our frequent contact with inmates now. Doors are more open. Inmates are out a lot more. We're involved with definitely communicating with them more ever than it was in the past. And I see this a lot with trustees and porters, where we develop these relationships which kind of lean towards obligation. Like basically, and it should never really be reciprocal. You assign them something, that's their job. But what they do is they may kind of go the extra mile in the hope that you could feel obligated towards them. And then that develops into a bit of a leverage for them. So again, I definitely see that develop between porters and trustees who are truly excellent at their job for that reason. And just people you may have frequent contact with. So as an officer, I may work a unit 5 days a week. These are inmates I have frequent dialogue with. So I have to remember, even in that frequency, where the boundaries are. But real quick, some examples. And we're talking about over trusting inmates due to familiarity is trusting long-term inmates with sensitive information or tasks. Allowing favorite, when it comes to trusting long-term inmates with sensitive information or tasks, guys, sadly, there have been officers or staff that know when searchers are coming, and because I'm cool with this porter, I give them a heads up. It happens. Or maybe we're having private discussions about the staff I work with to this inmate, and they're just feeding in. I mean, they tend to be asking more questions. Therefore, who's in control of the dialogue? The person asking the questions, not the person answering them. Allowing favorite inmates more freedom than others. Becoming too familiar and informal in interactions with inmates. Not maintaining professional boundaries with inmates. Overlooking minor rule infractions by trusted inmates. Ignoring warning signs of manipulation or deceit from inmates. And displaying lax behaviors such as having hands in pockets or feet on desks. And guys, these behaviors technically, because where it can lead to manipulation and criminal activity like bringing in contraband or sexual misconduct. You're looking at behaviors that are unethical in nature because they can travel into illegal activity if you don't maintain those boundaries. So what's the impact? So inmates may exploit the trust of officers, leading to smuggling of contraband, planning of escapes, or manipulation of staff. This undermines security and can result in significant breaches that put both staff and inmates at risk. So what's the solution? Reinforce professional boundaries through continuous training and reminders. Establish a system of checks and balances where interactions with inmates are monitored and reviewed. And get that book, Inmate Manipulation Decoded. I think that book gives a lot of good sound advice when it comes to complacent habits related to interpersonal communications. I also have something on communication in general, but this is more of communication between us, between staff, between frontline to frontline, peer to peer, or supervisor to frontline, or vice versa. But complacency in communication, so this is basically failing to communicate effectively, which kind of leads us to isolation. Failing to report your location when moving around the facility. Not updating colleagues on potential risk or ongoing issues, especially during shift exchange, because I'm trying to leave and I know you're coming in, but you should have came in a bit earlier, but I'm trying to get out the door. Assuming others know your plans without informing them. Neglecting to use radios or other communication devices properly. Ignoring the importance of shift handovers and briefings, which we just talked about. And not reporting suspicious behaviors or incidents promptly. What's the impact? Lack of communication can leave officers isolated and vulnerable in dangerous situations. Critical information may not be shared timely, leading to slower and inadequate responses to incidences, and overall safety and coordination suffer. What's the solution? Emphasize the importance of clear and timely communication through training, implement mandatory check-ins and debriefings to ensure information is shared effectively. Guys, in my book for report writing, I had a section on note-taking, because sometimes we may get some information that may not be urgent, but definitely something you want to go ahead and pass forward. Maybe it could develop into a pattern or something that could be urgent, but sometimes we're given it in the midst of other things that we're trying to accomplish. So you got to try to take that note, and then before the end of the shift, just look at the notes and see what you have to pass over, or if you have to pass something over to your supervisor. But you definitely want to take notes of the things that you feel you should pass over. It may not be something worthy of the logbook just yet, or or warranted for official documentation. But if we're trying to discern a pattern or something, then it's good to go ahead and make sure we take the proper notes and pass it over to where it's got to go, so we can keep that road open in case something is happening. And I do believe there could be some complacency towards that, because and guys, I also want to mention, I even saw, forgot where I was. I was in a county facility, and I saw you had an LCP officer, the eye in the sky, watching the officers on the floor, but there were certain areas that could not be seen from the eye in the sky, which was the bathroom area, especially if, you got the toilets, the showers, whatever it is. So the officer would travel back there and not tell the LCP officer. So there was no communication that this officer was going to be in a blind spot. And then you get the officer and the LCP making the assumption that's where they're at, where you really should be letting them know, hey, guys, I'm going up here. I know it's a bit of a blind spot. Just be vigilant. This is where I'm going to be. And maybe if there's not two officers on the floor, you at least know that's where this person is. And hopefully, maybe some way keep some contact with them while they're doing what they got to do. But usually for those blind spots, that's why you should have, two officers on the floor. Because the officer that's the eye in the sky can't see everything. But definitely, if you don't, and you only got that one officer, when you are out of view and you know where those blind spots are, because you should know what those cameras see, you should make sure that the officer that's the eye in the sky knows exactly where you are at all times. Technological complacency. So this is basically over-relying on technology, neglecting physical checks. You're going to see that a lot with new people because they're very dependent on technology in some cases. And then we got to remind them of the old school methods in case the technology fails. But with that said, we've become so reliant on technology because maybe the one-time purchase for cameras, people may believe is a good purchase because it deters. And that's not always the case. It's not always the case. I've seen people willing to get caught on camera because they know that our actions are going to be a lot less severe than the actions from the gangs who may do a little bit more. So with that said, you still got to have that investment in staff who can respond. That's the key. So technology works in partnership with, staff. You need that response. So if you want to use technology as a preventive measure, I get it, but you need that response. So again, you got over-relying on technology, neglecting physical checks, relying solely on surveillance cameras without regular physical checks, ignoring alerts from monitoring systems, assuming they are false alarms. I remember back in the day when you heard that radio alarm go off, everybody, kind of got ready. Where's it at? Give us a location. And then you had to say a code so they know that if the alarm went off, it was false. Now people would just be like, nah, I'm good. And it's like, okay, they're good. No, what was the code? Aren't they supposed to do some type of code that we know that they're good, that we know that they're not being taken hostage and being told to said that? That was the one thing that we were taught. But I've seen that, especially if the technology is malfunctioning. Like you could get certain things with security checks that can malfunction, and it's like, oh, that alarm always goes off, and you become lax in your response because that alarm keeps on going off. Unfortunately, one day it could be real, and at this point here, again, even though that alarm keeps on going off and it could be a pain in the ass, you got to treat it as if it's real. Maybe there is a malfunction and we can check on it, but in the meantime, you got to keep treating it as if it's real. Not updating or maintaining security technology regularly, because once you start increasing your technology, you do got to start updating it and make sure that you stay true with the updates, because those are the same thing with a cell phone. Try running an iPhone 5 now with all the updates. It's not going to happen. Failing to train staff on the proper use of new technology, assuming technology will catch all security breaches, overlooking the importance of manual security checks. So again, impact. Over-reliance on technology can create blind spots in security coverage. If technology fails or is circumvented by inmates, critical issues may go unnoticed. Regular physical checks are neglected, weakening the overall security or infrastructure. What's the solution? You combine technology with regular physical checks. Ensure all staff are trained on the latest technologies and maintain equipment to prevent reliance on outdated systems. All right. Now I want to get to supervisories. This is a good one. Supervisory complacency. So we're talking about management neglecting continuous reviews and training. So what do we have? We have supervisors that may neglect to conduct regular performance reviews or training sessions. So this is basically, a chance to communicate with your staff, see what they need, both as a team, but also as individuals. And you also got to make sure that communication is timely. It's not delayed. It's relevant to them in the moment. You ignore early warning signs of staff burnout or morale issues, and we're having that now in corrections. It's tough because we're just so understaffed, but you have to be weary in the process of all that. We do have people that can still do the job, and we're not just putting bodies there to put bodies there. I mean, this is going to be hard to mitigate. I mean, what's best for your facility, but I do say when it comes to this, yes, supervisor accountability ultimately is that final level of accountability, but peer-to-peer accountability works best. They know best ways to help each other to get through these tough times, and our job is to help facilitate what they need. Overlooking minor infractions leading to larger breaches of conduct. So you got officers that just maybe falling away slowly, what they got, the quiet quitting or whatever it is, and then now it's a matter of catching it before it gets bigger. So you got to look for patterns that are starting to stray away and catch those patterns. And usually those patterns originate from the basics that you expect to be done. So again, when you're a supervisor, you're checking the logbooks, you're making sure they're doing their simple things like the tours, the cell searches, stuff like that. If they start to stray away, you got to really start looking into that and seeing where this pattern is headed and do what needs to be done to stop that pattern, because it's getting bigger and bigger, or the concerns are going to get bigger and bigger. Failing to provide ongoing professional development opportunities. So that's not just at supervisory level, that's all the way up. I mean, if there's opportunities for training, we got to try to find ways to get our staff to that training and not just send them there, but make sure they got buy-in, understand the importance of it. I mean, if need be, look for people that are interested first, because they're the ones that can maybe communicate not just what was being taught at those training developments, but also the buy-in behind it, why it's needed, and maybe through peer-to-peer influence, they can get others on board. But with that said, this goes way beyond just liability training. Let's do training that's connected to something that's relevant, that they have interest in, something that they're dealing with in the facility. And I think that's needed more. And the excuses that, well, we don't have the money for it, stop. Because that doesn't stop the need for it. You got to figure out a way to manage the staffing with that training. It's not an impossibility. I mean, even if you have to lock down the facility for a day or two to get it done, it's worth it in the long run. So then we got not addressing recurrent issues or complaints from staff. We talked about that. Allowing complacent behaviors to go unchallenged. Wait, real quick. Not addressing recurrent issues or complaints from staff. That's basically when staff mention concerns, and you as a supervisor decide you're not going to either do anything about it if it's within your area of responsibility or pass those concerns up. Remember, they're going to tell you things that may require some level of action. They know more because they're actively involved in the work that needs to be done. So you got to keep your ears open with them. Again, if your staff's not telling you anything, then you're a bad leader. You should expect complaints, and then you got to kind of filter through which ones are need to be taken a little bit more serious. Allowing complacent behaviors to go unchallenged. We talked about that. Not addressing recurrent issues or complaints from staff. That was the... All right, so let's see. Impact. Staff may become disengaged and poorly trained, leading to a decline in performance and morale. And early warning signs of problems are missed, and minor issues can escalate into major incidences, and the facility becomes less efficient and secure. What's the solution? Schedule regular performance reviews and training sessions, encourage a proactive approach to addressing staff issues, and provide opportunities for professional development. Guys, when it comes to this section here of complacency, this is why if we fail at the basics, high-level administration goes right after the supervisors, the highest level on down, because these are things that they should have checked on, that they should have caught patterns of. And now we've fallen back so far that now we have to actually react when we could have been preventive. So that's why I think this is something here that really matters. Those supervisors really got to get on point, because even as, let's say, admin, when you go to ask them, hey, did you see this happen? No, we didn't expect it. But you know what? Recently, we noticed that ABC wasn't being done. Well, you noticed? Yeah, but we didn't think nothing of it. ABC wasn't being done. And now look where we're at now. So again, sometimes you got to be it's corrections. You got to be meticulous, especially as supervisors, because you're the ones that are going to catch the basics when they're not being done. And to be honest with you, as we mentioned, if you realize that complacency can happen, and it's in the mindset of individuals that go through the routine, the frequency of the routine, and also it's not the fact that it can happen, but they learn to accept it, then you have to be on point with trying to do your best to keep things moving forward. All right, so complacency in reporting. All right, so now let's get to complacency in reporting. Guys, I gotta take a second, man. Bug flew in my mouth. All right, so complacency in reporting, we're talking about inadequate documentation of incidents and infractions. So, all right, so we got inadequate documentation of incidents and infractions. So we have failing to document minor incidences or skirmishes between inmates. And again, look what that could elevate into. Two inmates not getting along, and all of a sudden, later on, they wind up getting into a fight. But let's say you notice them arguing before. That's good to document or take a little note. Doesn't mean you have to act on it immediately. You could check to see if the concerns are minimal and if these two adults could maybe not go into a physical altercation later on. But this could be a note worth passing on to your supervisor as well as your relief, so they're aware that these two inmates had an argument earlier in the day. So they can be a little bit more vigilant when they're hanging out in, let's say, a common area. Incomplete or inaccurate incident reports. This happens when, especially if you're working at a very active facility and you're going from one concern to another and you're just trying to get that report out. Let's just get it done and let's just move on to the next incident that's going to wind up happening. And you wind up being very brief and you eliminate a lot of the details that are needed to basically hold people accountable. Or enough details so we know exactly what's going on. Do we need a policy change or whatever? So it's more about lacking the details. Let's see. Assuming someone else will handle the paperwork. I've seen that. So I've written the report and it's all right. The supervisor will clean it up when they do their review. Not following up on reported incidents or infractions. I see this more with supervisors maybe, where if an incident occurs, they note it, but they may not note any follow-up to it. So basically, we had this code in yard. We took the two inmates out, blah, 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 and they leave it there. And it's like, okay, well, what was this related to? What were they fighting over? Is this a gang thing? Do we have any other concerns going to happen if we open the yard? So follow-ups matter because in those reports, it lets us know if we're able to move forward or do we have something that's got to be further investigated. Ignoring the importance of detailed and accurate record keeping. Let's see. Overlooking patterns of behavior that emerge from reports. We just discussed that. And the impact: incomplete or inaccurate records hinder the facility's ability to track and respond to trends in inmates' behavior. This can lead to a lack of accountability and a failure to prevent repeat incidences. Patterns of misconduct go unaddressed. Solution: establish strict guidelines for incident reporting and ensure they are followed. Implement a review system for reports to catch inaccuracies or incomplete documentation. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, and that's going to be in my book coming out. That's the supervisor. Once you have the officer's incident reports, the supervisor needs to make sure they're cohesive, consistent. So their effort to kind of also further look into the matter to make sure that that information is being passed up to the next chain of command is extremely, extremely important, because that's where all the information is gathered that will eventually be forwarded up to the highest level to see what needs to be done. So a lot of the times when you get these incomplete reports, we think that everything's okay when there were certain things that were not discovered or not discerned because there was no lack. There was a lack of follow-up. You know, it's like, oh, you know what? I'm just not beat for this today. I'll just, make sure these inmates are held accountable for what they've done. But I'm going to go ahead and submit the report as is. No, as a supervisor, give us some follow-up in those reports. Let us know if we have any further concerns that could require changes, especially to policy or procedure. All right, so we also got training complacency. So these are training programs. Training programs become routine or outdated. That's more about the liability training. Like, we're quick to give the liability training, but sometimes we don't put a lot of effort into the training that's relevant in the moment. Like, we'll give out, yes, don't get me wrong, we need the CPR training. I get that. Maybe some training on PREA would be another thing. But when was the last time you took training on report writing? I know we got it in the academy. Do you guys do that? Or do we revisit self-defense? Stuff that could matter because the world is evolving. When was the last time we got training on inmate manipulation? Because the game has changed. So these are changes that are relevant, and the people that train on these things should not be just reading off a PowerPoint. They should have experience in these areas so they can address the concerns that are going to come up in class. That should be real-time concerns. So again, not updating training programs to reflect new threats or tactics, skipping or not taking training sessions seriously, using outdated training materials that did not address current challenges, not incorporating scenario-based training exercises, failing to provide refresher courses or ongoing training, and ignoring feedback from staff about training needs and gaps. And this is definitely something that's at an agency level. This is at an agency level, and then ultimately trickles down to the administrative side. But definitely something that I would look first towards the agency. All right, so the impact: the staff are ill-prepared to handle new threats or scenarios. Outdated training leaves officers without the necessary skills to maintain security and safety. And continuous improvement and adaptation to new challenges are neglected. So what's the solution? Regularly updated training programs to address new threats and tactics, and incorporate scenario-based training and feedback from staff to keep programs relevant and engaging. And those scenario-based training should be as real as possible. All right, so let's get to health and safety. Complacency and health and safety. This is important now, more now than ever, because of burnout. The fact that we got staff that's doing tons of hours. Family life is in disarray because they're at work more than they're at home. They can't commit to engagements with the family because they can get hit at any moment. So this is something that really should be driven by the agency, but definitely facilitated to the highest level of management at that facility. But you got neglecting the physical and mental health, ignoring minor injuries or health issues, leading to bigger problems, not using personal protective equipment properly or consistently. This is more on an individual level, guys, but you also have an agency level too that should also make sure that we take care of the overall picture. But having said that, on an individual level, let's start it again. Neglecting physical and mental health, ignoring minor injuries or health issues leading to bigger problems, not using personal protective equipment properly or consistently. I see a lot of people doing PAFRIS without their gloves. That's a big thing. Overlooking mental health support and stress management, neglecting the importance of regular health screenings, not addressing workplace safety hazards promptly, and failing to promote a culture of health and wellness among staff. Okay, so it does cross into the higher picture where you have failing to promote a culture of health and wellness. But now, granted, if management decides to do it, is staff willing to take it? I mean, some staff can be very cynical. They could be kind of still concerned about management that they cannot trust, and therefore it makes them question every motive behind whatever is being done for staff. But sometimes Guys, you got to do it for yourself. Figure out the motive later. Your mental health is not where it needs to be. You got to let somebody know, because you're not going to be effective and you'll wind up getting yourself hurt or others hurt. So having said that, it's a two-way street. Provide the environment where people can be open with those vulnerabilities, but then we as ourselves got to accept those vulnerabilities. So the impact is increased absenteeism and burnout among staff, lead to a reduction in overall performance and morale. Unaddressed health and safety issues can result in higher injury rates and compromised safety for both staff and inmates. And what's the solution? Let's promote a culture of health and wellness by providing regular health screenings and mental health support. Ensure proper use of protective equipment and address safety hazards promptly. Hey guys, real quick on this. This really does start with peer-to-peer accountability. So just make sure before we start blaming management that we as peers accept this, because that's where it starts first, and then you'll see it will travel upwards. So now you have operational complacency. That's routine operations leading to overlooked updates and drills. Updates and drills. Are we running these drills? Failing to update emergency plans or conduct regular drills. I mean, you got a lot of facilities right now that you got to remind them to conduct these drills. But you need those drills. It keeps people on their toes. And even if you have an active facility, you still need to manage those drills. That really shouldn't count as a drill, because we want the immediate follow-up. The drill is also meant to be educational and informative, so it kind of guides us through it. Sometimes you go through a real issue and we don't really have the time to sit down with everyone and debrief, which we should. But if you work at an active facility, you may cross into another issue. So we don't really have the time to debrief and really dive in. So having the drills should ensure that we get the time to answer questions and maybe even pull from recent incidences where we still have to find some closure to, some things that were left open because we didn't have a chance to kind of really fully dive into it because another incident happened right after that. So that's a good way to maybe do serious follow-up, even if it's maybe a month later. Hey, we know these incidents happened last month, so let's go and discuss, a little bit of what we could have done better or what we did that made this a successful response. So you got failing to update emergency plans or conduct regular drills, overlooking the need for regular reviews of operational procedures, allowing routine operations to become too predictable and unchallenged. And I've discussed that on my show, another episode here where we talked about professional predictability. Inmates got to have expectations that you're going to do these certain things. But there is some discretion, and that's where management has to allow some level of discretion. So within our professional predictability, we don't become too predictable that it gets used against us. So you got to allow for routine operations to be allowing routine operations to become too predictable. We talked about or unchallenged, not adapting procedures to reflect changes in the inmate population, and ignoring feedback from staff about operational inefficiencies. And we talked about that. Staff is going through it frontline. You cannot ignore them. They're the ones that are dealing with the concerns at the most immediate level. If you don't listen to what they're going through, then you got to have problems that you don't even know exist, and two, you never be innovative, because the best innovation comes from the people that are doing it. And then overlooking the importance of continuous improvement and initiatives. What's the impact? So emergency response plans become outdated and ineffective. Lack of regular drills lead to confusion and delayed responses during actual emergencies, and the facility's ability to manage crisis is significantly weakened. And guys, think about this. The feedback that you get, again, backtracking here, with the drills will add to better policies. I know a big thing will be active shooters now, stuff like that. What can we do better? What posts should be armed? Who's going to be that immediate response? So one, we make sure that we protect the people that are in the facility, but how do we go ahead and have an aggressive response towards the shooter once they've been identified? Solution: regularly review and update emergency plans and conduct drills, encourage continuous improvement, and adapt procedures to reflect changes in inmate population. I got 3 more. So we got 2 more, sorry. Team complacency. So this is when teams assume perfect coordination, leading to communication lapse. So this kind of goes back to communication, but a couple little uniqueness here. So assuming everyone knows their role without regular coordination. You see that with rookies sometimes too, sadly. They come in and, we automatically may assume, hey, go cover this post. And they may not know what they're doing. Hopefully they're humble enough to admit that. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they think they know the job after day one, but Sometimes they know they don't know it, and we just send them out to the wolves without any guidance. Oh, they'll figure it out. Guys, when they have questions, we want to make sure they come to us, not to the inmate population. And sometimes we don't want them figuring it out. We want to guide them through it, because who knows what direction they're going to go, what type of information they're getting to go that direction. So again, that's assuming everyone knows their role without regular coordination, lack of communication during high-stress situations. Thinking that my partner's automatically okay. Yeah, I know he went through this, but he's done this many times before. He'll be fine. Not conducting team building exercises or briefings. This is to kind of keep things cohesive, keep us communicating. I think lineup is great because it allows us a chance to see each other, check in, instead of going right to our post and, not seeing a person that you used to see for, every day for years now because you're in a post that's isolated. No, we should find a way to bring these people in and communicate and just make sure they know that they're a part of this team. Because if they're communicating with inmates more than they're communicating with you, the frequency of contact, the chance for undue familiarity to open is greater because there's no counter influence. We talked about failing to debrief after incidences to identify areas of improvement, ignoring the importance of cross-training staff for various roles. Again, you got to have a bench that has strong backup. So you got to have a strong depth. That's what it is. So you want to have people that could understand each other's roles. So if someone's out, they know when to jump in. And I've seen that happen where you have specialized posts, but when that person's out, everything falls backwards. It's like, no, who's his backup and who's the backup's backup? Overlooking the need for clear leadership and direction in teams. Now, what's the impact? Lack of coordination and communication can lead to operational failures, especially in high-stress situations. Teams may not respond effectively to incidences, resulting in increased risk and compromised safety. And guys, this doesn't just involve one department. We also work together with other departments. So if you have a medical code, I love to see it when, custody and medical are just working together. They know it so well that they don't need to communicate in the moment. They just kind of understand each other's role because they've gone through the drills. They just know what to expect of each other, when to, take the ball and when to pass the ball. So again, this is not just through one department, but also how we work with the other departments and incidences that may require a multi-perspective approach. And then what's the solution? Emphasize the importance of clear and timely communication through training, implement mandatory check-ins and debriefings to ensure information is shared effectively. And on top of that, I want to add, got to get the buy-in. So it's not just about communicating effectively in regards to having them understand what needs to be done, but did I get them to buy in? Did I get them to want to be invested? And the last one is cultural. And I put this as the last because this is the overall encompassing thing. A culture that normalizes cutting corners and lacks vigilance. This is when you start to accept it as the norm. This kind of falls back to the procedural side. But cultural that normalizes it. So we got senior staff modeling complacent behaviors that new staff adapt. So now think about that. It's complacency training complacency. Normalizing the cutting of corners or skipping procedures because we're looking to be more efficient as opposed to being effective. Lack of emphasis on vigilance and proactive security measures. And it's funny because I have people that brag about teaching shortcuts. I'll teach you a shorter way to do this instead of doing it all this way. Not realizing what you're cutting, the corners you're cutting. Lack of emphasis on vigilance and I said proactive security measures, allowing that's how we've always done it mentality to persist, ignoring the importance of continuous professional development, failing to promote a culture of accountability and responsibility. And what's the impact? You got a culture of complacency that undermines overall facility security and safety. Staff may become disengaged and less vigilant, leading to increased risk and incidents. New staff quickly adopt these poor practices, perpetuating the cycle. And what's the solution? Foster a culture of accountability and continuous improvement. Encourage staff to challenge complacent behaviors and provide regular training to reinforce vigilance and proactivity. Guys, I want to say something with that last part. Peer-to-peer accountability matters. If we enforce it amongst each other, it will travel up and make it easier for management to be that ultimate level of accountability. So peer-to-peer accountability, that can even help for burnout. If we hold each other accountable at a peer level, because that's the primary source of accountability is peer-to-peer, then management, which is the ultimate accountability, has got more support. As always, guys, the show is Tirto. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.